Just how does a woman who grew up in rural Indiana in the US as a fundamentalist Christian end up becoming a practicing Jew in New York? For more on the story, don't go away. We'll be back in a sec. If you're just joining us, a warm welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. Whether you're watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Periscope, on Twitter, welcome to the show, and we hope you join into the conversation. I'm your host, Bridgetti Banda from Cape Town in South Africa. So just how does a woman who grew up in rural Indiana as a fundamentalist Christian end up becoming a practicing Jew in New York? The Himsels followed an evangelical branch of Christianity that was intertwined in a doomsday philosophy. So stay with us and meet Angela Himsel to get the backstory of her book. But first of all, let me say hello to my friend and co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She's a special needs and disabilities advocate and also an award-winning author of the Poolicious children's book series, and she's in Nashville in the USA. So do let us know where you are from. Hi, Mary. How are you today?
Hi, Bridgetti. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm all right. It's not too cold. You know, we're in the middle of winter. So I'm a happy camper today because it's not freezing.
Oh my gosh, I know. I'm never happy in the winter. I was born in the Florida sunshine and I'm happiest in the sun and the heat, actually. Humidity does not really drive me crazy like it does a lot of other people, because I guess growing up in that, your body gets used to wherever you were born, you know, and I think it just kind of stays with you, because I haven't lived there for like 28 years, but it's my happy place. So I just don't think it does.
Absolutely. And a warm welcome to Dr. Hyatt there. He's watching on LinkedIn.
Hello. Yes. Hello, all our LinkedIn viewers and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Periscope.
Absolutely. So as an introduction to Angela, she grew up in rural southern Indiana in a fundamentalist doomsday Christian faith. She was the seventh of 11 children, and her book, A River Could Be a Tree, traces that journey. Angela converted to Judaism and lives in New York City. So we just scattered all over the place, aren't we? But let's get Angela onto the show and hear. But I'm also intrigued by the name of her book. We need to ask her about that. So let's invite her onto the show.
Hi,
welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, your journey is one of the most interesting journeys I think of anyone we've met so far, and it's very inspirational and fascinating too.
Thank you.
So tell us a bit about your childhood.
You know, I'm going to tell you a bit about my childhood, but I think it's kind of relevant to talk about my parents just for a second, because part of the reason they joined the Worldwide Church of God was because of their own backgrounds. My mother was the oldest of 7 kids, and her family was Catholic. And as a matter of fact, she at one time considered becoming a nun, which we all think is very funny since she went on to have 11 kids. And my father was the oldest of 3 kids, and his family was Lutheran. When they got together in the 1950s, this was definitely considered a mixed marriage within the Christian groups. The Catholics and the Lutherans, they got along, but they did not really intermarry. And So neither one of them wanted to become the other person's religion. And so they started looking around for another church that they could call their own. And the radio evangelists were very popular in the 1950s. And also you have to remember this is right after World War II, when it looked like the world was going to be blown up any second. So a lot of the radio evangelists had to do with the end of the world. It's coming, and you have to get saved. So they heard Herbert Armstrong on the radio, and he had a program called the Radio Church of God, which later turned into the Worldwide Church of God. And he offered answers to all of those big questions we all want to know. Where are we from? Where are we going? How do we get there? That sort of thing. And so they really became enamored with him and with that particular church. So we were raised in the Worldwide Church of God. And it was, we were minorities basically within our own community. We were the only family in Jasper, Indiana to belong to this church. So I think that, kind of being an outsider in my own sense, and we were outsiders in some sense. So that's kind of how I grew up. And I had questions about the church for many, many reasons. And so those questions did not lead me to any answers that I was comfortable with. And so that's kind of the background, I guess, of the religious piece.
Wow. How does your family feel about, are you the only one in your family that became Jewish? Are the rest of them still with the same church?
No, they're not in that same church. The church ended up, we discovered that it was corrupt, and surprise, in the 1980s. And so a lot of people left. There were a lot of offshoots, splinter groups. Some people still believed in the church, but they left for various reasons. And my parents stayed in it until they passed away. My siblings all left at different times. My younger sister stayed, I guess, the longest, and the rest of them left. Some of them are sort of just mainstream Christianity, and some, I guess, have no religious practice, I would say.
Okay, so I know this kind of leads into our next question that we have for you. So what was that defining moment that made you decide to leave? Yeah. And did it have to do with the corruption? Because I know why I left in high school, because I was seeing things that were not what I considered Christian, and did not feel good to me. And so I left in latter part of high school and was like, okay, now I've got to find something, because this is a delusion now of what I thought, what I had my whole life. So I can relate in some instances. And then I grew up around TV evangelists who were all crooked. So, it does make you question religion. And it's very sad when it gets corrupt like that. But what was kind of that defining moment for you?
So there were a couple of defining moments, I guess. The church had lots of different doctrines that I found kind of troublesome, let's just say. They were, anti-homosexual, horoscopes. You couldn't read your horoscopes. The magic 8 ball was considered to be kind of demon-possessed. We're always kind of looking over our shoulder for demons. And there were a lot of things that I found concerning and troubling. But I will say that it wasn't until I was in college and I came home one weekend and went to church services with my parents, and this is in my book. The minister sort of started out and he said, "Brethren, Satan has been allowed a foothold in this church, and women, it's because of you that Jesus can't return. It's your makeup. Throw it out." And I just found that so stupid and shocking. Jesus should have better things to worry about than my mascara. So that kind of started the whole thing of how the church really was overreaching. And it wasn't any longer about religious doctrines, it was about personal doctrines. And I guess that was kind of a metaphor for a larger concern I had, which is, they're supposed to be leaders spiritually and not tell you how to what to do with your body and so on. So that kind of started it. And then I ended up going to Israel my junior year abroad. And, you know, I think travel always brings out all of your curiosity, and you find out about other people, and they're different than you, and they have different beliefs, and they have different beliefs because that's what they were taught. So I kind of felt more open to exploring other religions and seeing what they had to offer. And maybe they had something to offer that was more in keeping with kind of who I felt I was. So that was really the start of it. I did not go to Israel looking for another religion. I went there as a Christian and believed, you know, very much. But I think sometimes, you know, you go on a search and you just don't know what you're going to end up finding, because that's kind of what happens, you know.
It's interesting that you had this process that was started with a question and led to more questions, and then you looking for something different. You know, I in my own journey, I found so many people who never get to that point. They simply stick with what's familiar, with what's comfortable. And even though it doesn't feel right, and even though they may not even agree with all the teachings, they'll stick with it simply because it's the religion of their parents.
Right.
So it's very interesting that you actually took the time to look into things, to see if you could find something different, you know, that resonated with you. But given, you know, the circumstances of your upbringing and what happened to you, do you feel that you became a victim of your circumstances, or would you say that you are a victor?
You know, it's funny. I don't mean to be rude, but I don't like either word because I don't consider myself either, I guess. I think I just sort of did what probably a lot of people do, is, you know, you kind of just bumble along. And sometimes things just come across you, they just do. And I do think, you know, sociologically, we're all kind of victims of our childhoods. We just are, no matter what. It's going to affect you no matter what. And I sort of always, one of the things I really wanted to sort of say in this book was that we all, there's a lot of things you can change in life, and I'll tell you about my title in a second. There's a lot of things you can change in life, and then there's a lot of things you can't change. You can't change, you know, the century you grew up in, and you can't change the family you grew up in, and the country you grew up in, and all of these things that really shape us. They just do, all of us. But there's some things that you can change, and I do think about that. In terms of my title, that really does have to do with change. It's called A River Could Be a Tree. It comes from a phrase in the book in which I was pushing back against the church and its teachings, especially its anti-woman teachings. And I said to my father, I said, you know, I don't think that the church said that women were made for men, not men for women, and women were supposed to be a man's helpmeet, and, you know, all that stuff. So I said, I don't think that women have to be subservient to men by any means. And my father said, well, God created a role for everything in the universe. Men have their roles, women have their roles. What would happen if a river thought it could be a tree? And that comes from obviously his farm background, you know. And so
that's a very interesting story.
Yeah. So when I was looking at titles, you know, we had lots of different contenders for titles, and I thought, you know, let me just see if there's a phrase in here that kind of summarizes something. And I liked that a river could be a tree, not a river couldn't be a tree, but it could be a tree. So sometimes a river can be a tree, you know.
And you're honoring your dad too with the title.
Yeah.
So it's really, that's quite amazing.
Yeah.
And man, some of those statements really just, they kind of hold and mean so much, even though you kind of go, wait, what? Yeah, that is really cool. So tell us about what led up to deciding to write your story, because, well, I don't know. Sometimes people, I don't guess everyone wakes up thinking, I am going to write the story about my life today. Some people may think about it, you know, especially those who do write about it. They think about, hey, someday I'll do this. But then what happens when it's like that day? Okay, it's Saturday, June 8th. Okay, this is the day I'm getting up. So did it happen like that, or did it like kind of just trail for a while?
You know, I think like all writers, I'm sure like both of you, that I always wanted to be a writer. I had fancy notions of myself, by the way, just so you know. Even in Southern Indiana, you can have fancy notions. One of my fancy notions was to be a poet, but I definitely am not a poet. I included some bad poetry in my memoir just to prove that that was not a good choice. And then I thought I'll write a novel, which I am working on a novel. So it was writing fiction, fiction. And then I was doing a column on Zeek.net called Anja Tevka, which is a nod to, you know, Anna Tevka, Fiddler on the Roof. Because in my little Jewish village on the Upper West Side, which it sounds like New York City is just huge and not like a village, but it is like a little village. Yeah. So I was sort of juxtaposing my life as a Jew on the Upper West Side with my life growing up in rural Southern Indiana on the Portersville Road. With one bathroom with 11 kids, you know? So that was really fun. I was just writing this weekly column. So at one point somebody said, you know, Angela, you should write a memoir. And I thought to myself, which was so stupid, I guess that as a writer, sometimes you have to believe that it's not going to take very long because otherwise you would never set out to do it. So I sort of thought, you know what, I'll just weave all of these various essays together and I will create a narrative. Oh, it did not work that way. So I started out really thinking, and I guess, again, we always have to, when we start out any project, whether it's, you know, renovating or whatever, you have to see it as doable. Otherwise, you just sort of say, I'm not going to get out of bed today. So I started writing it based on those columns, really. But then it ended up not being with those columns at all. It really ended up having the traditional beginning, middle, and end arc. You know, we go on a quest to find something, and then we find something. So that's what it ended up being. But that was the genesis of it. It, by the way, it took me over 10 years to write it. So yeah, it's not like this happens overnight, you know.
Which is fascinating.
I'm
But
sure.
the people that Bridgetti and I have met, because we're coming up on 2 years for our show. And, it's amazing how many people we've met that their books have taken so long. Like I think, who was it? I think it was one of our authors, 30 years. Is that right, Bridgetti?
Yep. That's right. It took 30 years.
I'm really not surprised. I mean, it's not like you're not doing other things in the meantime, obviously. You're not sitting there every day. I wish I were, but I don't. But yeah, it does take a while, and the thought process takes a while. You know, I remember writing it, and I was in a writing group at the time, and when somebody in the writing group said, but how did you feel about that, Angela? And I'm like, I don't know how I felt. What do you care how I felt? And then I realized, like, my old German Midwestern roots were coming out. It's like, don't make me talk about my feelings. So you have to come to terms with really being vulnerable, really sharing, really going into kind of the trenches and letting people get in there with you. Because if you don't, it's really going to be one-dimensional, maybe two-dimensional, but not three-dimensional. And you really have to let people into your life in a way that's sometimes uncomfortable. I wrote a scene in there about my siblings and how we fought with each other and called each other names and all that. And I really didn't want to write that scene. I just thought, ugh, who wants to hear about that? Anyway, a lot of people have said, oh, I so related to that scene. So I'm happy that I ended up writing the things that were kind of uncomfortable or I really wanted to edit out and didn't want to appear in there. We all want a more sanitized version of ourselves, you know. But sanitizing something is not going to make it interesting. It's the dirty details you want. You know?
Well, it's also the transparency, because transparency sells. Right. And when people can relate to you, then you're like somebody that can latch onto and go, okay, so this is real. I'm not alone, and I can trust this person. There's a belief that happens with another human when they can see that transparency that doesn't happen when we put all the fluff and the frosting on and make it look like perfect, you know?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of huddle together, you know, when we relate to someone else's story. So how did you, you know, just listening to what you said now, how did you move forward with being vulnerable, you know, because I think we've all got stuff that we sort of want to share because it's
Mm-hmm.
therapeutic to share it. We want to get it out there. But then we sort of think, how's mom going to feel? How's dad going to feel? How's John going to feel? How's Mary going to feel?
Right.
So, and you've got to get over yourself, because
Right.
being an author makes you completely vulnerable. You sort of
Mm-hmm.
laying bare, the details that people otherwise wouldn't know about your life. How did you move past that feeling of should I, shouldn't I?
A long time ago, some teacher a long, long time ago always said, you cannot have anybody sitting on your shoulder. You can't have grandma sitting on your shoulder. You can't have your parents sitting on your shoulder. You can't have, some internal editor shushing you. And I think that when you sit down to write, at least when you're writing, just get it all out there. You can edit it later. You can change it later. You can change names later. But get it all out there because nobody's watching. I promise. Nobody's watching. It's just between you and the paper or the computer. And I think that being able to remind yourself, if I look at this in 6 months and I don't like it, I can change it. It's not set in stone. So I think that I try to give myself permission to write something even when I'm uncomfortable with it, but I'm not always successful because sometimes I'm unconsciously censoring myself, not even on purpose, just like, I don't want to write about that. So it's not even about that external, voice telling me to stop.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. How did you, well, let's see, just kind of, so you're talking, you let us know about your vulnerability and you're just kind of giving advice too, because that is really important for people to understand that it is between you and the book. You do have options, you do have those options to change. I know for myself, it gets really, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to put that out there, or what if that isn't good enough and, somebody hates it, they don't hear what's the meaning that's behind it. And all of that's super important and but I am somebody who likes to bounce stuff off of someone else most of the time. And I want your point of view from it. Can you give me some feedback? What do you think? I've even done that with Bridgetti about stuff. And, because those things are really important for anyone writing out there, it's like, just do it, just start.
Right.
And then just get yourself into a groove. And if you get stuck, then call somebody, talk to somebody, say, hey, I'm really stuck here and I feel lost, or whatever it is that you feel, and always walk away if you need to, to get the fresh air and fresh look on things and stuff. But how about, can you walk us through kind of, your marketing strategy? And did you, what I know, I want to know what your next project is.
I'm working on a novel. I have not given up on fiction. I love fiction, and I really am sick of talking about myself. So since when you write a memoir, you're talking about yourself, and I'm like, somebody very different than myself. And since I have this fascination with the Bible, I'm working on a novel that takes place in King David's time. But I'm telling it from multiple points of view, mainly from the women's points of view, because they don't get much of a point of view, as you know, from what I said about women's roles and men's roles in the Bible. So I am having a lot of fun with that, I have to say. I can make them into anything I want them to be. So, and also in terms of your point, in terms of, the marketing, my book is seen by many as a Jewish book. I don't view it as a Jewish book. I also don't view it as a women's book. I like to think that books are books, right? But having said that, I know that there is that marketing strategy. If you write a memoir, it's actually funny because when I went to Barnes & Noble, it was under Christian inspiration. I thought, they missed that one. I don't know. So I think that with the marketing, I really did try, though, to look at the audiences who might be interested in it, whether it was Jewish or not Jewish, obviously Midwestern, because I'm from the Midwest,
And who did you write it in mind with? I mean, did you have a specific audience in mind when you wrote the book, or was this just purely for you?
You know what? It really was for me. I mean, I think that there's always an audience unconsciously in mind, but I think that one thing that people have told me about my book is that it sounds just like me. So there's no, it's my voice. It doesn't sound like I haven't elevated my voice to be, sound anything other than who I am. And I think that, again, that's something that you just play with for all. The other thing, though, is I was aware that not everybody's going to know about the Christian world. Not everybody will know about the Jewish world. So I sort of had to explain both worlds to the audience. So that I did feel that if it's going to be a general book, I needed to make clear things that would not necessarily be clear.
And how did being an author change life for you? Did you feel that it empowered you somewhat? Did it make a difference at all?
You know what? It did. It did. I mean, it's funny because I think that if you're in any kind of a job whatsoever, if you work as a lawyer and you don't get paid, you feel bad about it. It's like, wait a minute, I put in all of these hours and I didn't get paid. So anybody in the arts, we put in a lot of hours. And the payback is to have an audience. That's the payback. The payback is maybe make some money, maybe do other things. But the payback is I said something and people heard it, and people have been in touch with me, both former members of the church and other people who came from other religious backgrounds, as well as Jews by choice. So I've had a lot of really good feedback from other people. And that's been very helpful, I have to say, as an author, to know that you put something out there and it's relevant, let's say.
That's a good question, Bridgetti, from this person.
Yes, Gospel's got a question here. She says she's in the research phase of a book. And she says, what advice would you give me? It's going to be an empowering women's event.
So I love research. It is a rabbit hole. You have to be so careful not to go down that rabbit hole. I absolutely love research. And I will tell you, for example, I was working on my novel and I was like, the threshing floor. Let me see what a threshing floor looked like in biblical times. So I spent about 2 hours looking at threshing floors. I did not need to. I really didn't. It was a stone floor that had grain on it. I did not need to look. That was so fun. So I would just be careful about the research. A little goes a long way, but it is a lot of fun. Yeah. It's
important. And research is important too.
It's very important. Totally. It is important.
You'll get this question. Yeah, you'll get those questions. People will come back and they'll say things. And if you're quoting stuff and you're writing stuff that you can't back up, or you are looking like the expert on, and then you can't back that up, then as a writer, you're kind of,
absolutely.
So I would say that for her too. Just,
right. Yeah. Research is so important. Totally.
Yeah. Make sure that you do. I can. So you came from one religion and then you chose another one, but it's very strict also, isn't it?
Well, it depends. I mean, the thing about Judaism is there's certainly lots of different branches. There's Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and then there's just secular, which is, you don't even go to synagogue. You just have a Passover Seder and go to synagogue, let's say, for Rosh Hashanah. It has more options.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to know, because somebody who's not Jewish might not know that. And so, thank you for sharing that, because I'm fascinated by religion as well. And, going away from church like I did when I was in high school and then coming back to it, and meeting my pastor who made me actually really believe again, it's all very, very sacred to each of us, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
We've got, I can't believe it, but we've already out of time. But before we do close the show, can you please let our audience know how they can connect with you, and more importantly, where can they find your book?
They can connect with me on Facebook. I'm at Angela Himsel on Facebook. I have a website, angelahimsel.com. They can also email me that way if they would like to. And my book is sold on Amazon and other, any retailer, basically. You can order it.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. It was lovely meeting you and hearing your story.
Thank you so much.
We need to have her back on. especially when you get the novel done. We'll have to have you back on.
Please
You're
God.
cool about it.
I hope it doesn't take 10 years.
I don't know either. Yeah, we don't want to go 10 years without seeing you again.
No.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thank you everyone for watching us, and we'll be back
you.
again next week. Take care and write good stuff.